You talking about football?
Yeah, Town, NFC North. Then let's talk football.
Welcome back, everybody. This is Headed North, an NFC North podcast, and I am your host, D-Tron. And this week we've got quite a bit on the schedule. We're going to be looking at what's going on in Minnesota because it ain't good. We'll be recapping some Chicago Bears moves this offseason and how they are currently winning the free agency wars. We'll get to my Lions. Of course, they are shoring up that defensive backfield. Man, I'm so happy about that. You just don't understand. And then we also are going to get back into the drama that is the Green Bay Packers. But this week, I am really excited to tell you guys that we are sponsored by, well, we could be sponsored by you if you went down in our show notes and hit us up in our email, let us know how we can fulfill your advertising needs. But until then, I'll just keep plugging our ability to do just that. All right, we're going to tear right into this week's topics with the Chicago Bears first. Now, last week, I brought up the fact that DJ Moore, if he had his career numbers in Chicago, he would already be leading the Chicago Bears franchise for receiving yards. And then I posed this question. Do you know who leads Chicago Bears franchise currently? Because I don't, or at least I didn't. And I got some suggestions, so shout out to my guy Jason, who said Matt Forte, which he's on the list, but he's not number one. I also got Alshon Jeffrey, who is number 3 on the list. But I'm about to break into a little bit of history for you. Do you know who Johnny Morris is? I'm sure you don't, because he played for the Chicago Bears between 1958 and 1967. He's the leading receiver for the Bears organization. He put up 5,059 yards on 356 catches. Had 31 touchdowns, and he got a championship back in 63 or somewhere around there. Look, man, the Bears have gone a really long time without a consistent wide receiver to put up numbers for that franchise. So I'm really excited about the move that they made to go and get DJ Moore. It's going to make their offense even more dynamic. But they didn't stop there. The Chicago Bears have picked up a ton of weapons this offseason. So let me run down the list right quick. You've got the linebackers, Edmonds and Edwards. They went and got multiple weapons on that offensive side. Travis Homer from Seattle. They also went and picked up a tackle, Nate Davis, out of Tennessee. They even went and picked up Tunyon from across the street from the Green Bay Packers. Now, Tunyon is not an amazing tight end, right? He's good, though. He put up 470 yards on 53 catches. But when you pair him along with Cole Kmet, who seems to be really coming on for the Chicago Bears, I mean, Cole Kmet put up 540 yards on 50 catches. So you could potentially be running some 2 tight end sets with Justin Fields in the backfield. And you also have the addition of Dante Freeman from Carolina. So now you're running with 2 pretty good blocking and catching tight ends. You've got Dante Freeman in the backfield. You still got Khalil Herbert. You've got Justin Fields, of course, who is always dynamic in the run game. And then you put DJ Moore and Claypool and Mooney out on the ends. The Chicago Bears offense is starting to look dangerous. And when you think about them in context of the division, they could go from last to first pretty easily. Minnesota Vikings are experiencing some very turbulent waters right now. And so I don't foresee them getting back to the promised land of leading that division immediately or potentially for a long time. And Green Bay is a soap opera right now. So who knows what's going to happen with the Jordan Love era or if it's even going to start. So really it's between Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions. And both of these teams have been making some really aggressive moves in the offseason to shore up some spots where they were really just lacking. I mean, if the Chicago Bears go and pick up a few offensive linemen, they're going to be rolling. The Chicago Bears have really made themselves into a significant player in free agency, and they still have a quality draft pick. You're talking, I think, the 10th pick that they traded with Carolina. So now they can still go out and target a major defensive lineman. I know there was some talk around Georgia's defensive lineman, but I mean, he's going to definitely drop in the draft. I just don't think after his pro day, the Chicago Bears want to still be in on him. But potentially targeting a different defensive lineman or maybe even a defensive back coming out of the draft, I could see them maybe even going after Gonzalez if he's still available on the board, because that's one section that they still need to shore up. But the Chicago Bears have really built out their offense and made some really valuable additions to their defense as well. So Chicago Bears, again, are really winning in the offseason free agency wars, draft wars. They're winning everything right now. Hopefully next season they just win games. Now we're going to move from a team who has been making all the right moves to a team that seems to be stuck in neutral, the Green Bay Packers. It came out last week that Aaron Rodgers wants to be a New York Jet. At least he believes that he wants to be a New York Jet. It is pretty solidly understood that he no longer wants to be a Green Bay Packer. So the question is probably, why hasn't this deal been done yet? And the simple answer is money. Money, money, money. Rodgers and the Jets have not been able to pull this thing off because the Packers still have leverage. The Jets want him. Aaron wants to be there. But there's this small hitch of about $100 million that Aaron is going to be owed for these next 2 years. Because last March, he signed a 3-year extension for $150 million. And so that can be limiting for the number of teams that's willing to pick him up, even if there is a desire to get him. So to get Aaron, the Jets are probably going to have to do some creative moves to make it happen. And they're going to have to give up some pieces. So if you think about what the Jets have and or are willing to get rid of, you're probably looking at most certainly that 43rd pick that they have and an offensive weapon. Because if you get rid of Aaron and you're bringing in Jordan Love and you've already taken Lazard, you're going to need some additional weapons on the offense for Jordan Love to have any shot of being successful. So that's someone like, I don't know, like Elijah Moore. I would say Garrett Wilson, but they're not going to give up Garrett Wilson. And if they did, that would certainly be, I think, enough motivation for the Green Bay Packers to ship Aaron Rodgers and potentially even to pay some of his contract needs as he goes over to the Jets. But in lieu of getting Garrett Wilson or Elijah Moore in the 43rd pick, I think the only other accommodation that they could potentially make to get Aaron Rodgers would be giving up that 13th overall pick, but then also giving some kind of conditional pick for the 2024 draft. Because I don't think just a first round number 13 pick is going to be enough for the Jets to absorb all of the money that they have to absorb with Aaron Rodgers. So that's sort of what you're looking at, is how do they finesse this deal to make it work so that all sides can feel like they're good. And there's a couple of like really key dates that are coming up that will impact the timing of all of this. I know there is the draft coming up on 4/27. You want to get this done before the draft. That way, if you're getting some draft capital, it applies to this draft. If not, then you're going to be looking at players' money or potential conditional draft picks for following years, which doesn't feel as good when the Green Bay Packers need some immediate help. And the other thing is Jordan Love's 5th-year option is coming up. I think they have to have that signed by like the week following the draft. So like 5/2, 5/4. And you assume that Jordan Love is probably being picked up for that 5th-year option, which makes him, which I think he gets like $20 million guaranteed for that 5th-year option pickup. There's no way that you're going to pay him $20 million and also somehow keep Aaron Rodgers on the staff. That's just a lot of money being thrown at the quarterback position that doesn't make much sense. So Aaron's going to get shipped, and it would seem like sometime before the draft would make the most sense for both parties to get the kind of capital that they want. There's still no end in sight, though, for this. And it makes you think, why every time players leave Green Bay, they always leave in such a huff, right? Like it's never really clean, especially individuals who have been there as long as, I mean, the two cases that come to mind are Aaron Rodgers and Brett Favre. It always seemed like there was something, right? A reason. It was tumultuous when they left the organization. It was never just a clean break where they throw up their fingers and say peace. You know, it was a great gig and I'm just going to move on, right? It always seems like there's some drama attached to it. And it could be just those players or it could be the organization. But either way, the longer this draws out, I think the more it favors the Jets, right? So having to get in before the draft, some immediacy, I think Green Bay sort of has the leverage, but the longer it goes on, I think the Jets do. And if not, Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers end up getting stuck together or having to ship a deal to a new team who may not be the ideal landing spot for Aaron. So the drama continues. One person that won't be there for the drama, I already mentioned, was Tunyon because he went to the Chicago Bears doing some interdivisional jumping ship. But it seems to work for a lot of people, hence Montgomery going from Chicago Bears to the Lions. Speaking of the Detroit Lions, the Lions have done quite the job in free agency. They are number one because I'm giving that to the Chicago Bears and all the moves that they've made, which makes sense because the Bears got a ton of cap space. They got like $41 million to work with. But the Lions aren't way off, and they have made some pretty impressive moves in their secondary. So I think last week I mentioned to you already that they went and picked up Mosley off of the 49ers for a 1-year deal. They also went and got Cam Sutton on a 3-year deal out of Pittsburgh. And then this past week, they basically surprised everybody and went and got Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. That basically blew everybody's mind. Like he was the best available cornerback out. And with already taking 2 cornerbacks, no one really saw a 1-year deal with him coming. And it's amazing. As a Lions fan, the defensive secondary has certainly been an opportunity for the team. And everyone knows that. And so going out and getting 3 defensive backs did a great job of shoring up the back half of the defense. But it also presents a question. And that question is, what are you going to do with all of these defensive backs? So let me run down who they got. So we talked about Cam Sutton and Mosley and Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. And now we've got Will Harris, who just re-signed a 1-year, $2.5 million deal. You've got Melifonwu. You've got Awarrior. You've got Jerry Jacobs. You've got Kirby Joseph, CJ Moore, Will Harris. I mentioned him already. And then also Jeff Okudah, which, by the way, he was our number 1 guy. Beginning of the season, a lot of love for Jeff. And toward the end of the season, he was sitting out games, not starting, being injured randomly. It seems like the Lions have really began to cool on Jeff Okudah. And I think bringing in these other 3 defensive backs and re-signing some backs that were already there, certainly a sign that Jeff may be on his way out. So I think that's a story developing that you want to watch, is if he's out of there, what kind of trade can they get for him? What kind of assets can they acquire if there's an open market for him? But definitely the Lions making some moves on the back end to try to solidify a very problematic area for them last season. Also, the Lions brought back Graham Glasgow. He was once a Lion. Now he's a Lion again on a 1-year, $4.5 million deal to add to that offensive line and give us some continued stability with that group. Certainly something to pay attention to, as you may have some moving pieces at that right or left tackle, and to see Graham Glasgow try to shift into there might be an interesting move with the Detroit Lions. There was also a bit of smoke after the Jamal Williams trade. Jamal recently signed with the New Orleans Saints. And during his press conference, he essentially said that the deal that was offered to him from the Lions was disrespectful. Of course, I am not an insider, so I don't know what that check looked like. But based off of what they gave David Montgomery, I would assume that the money was similar. Maybe a little less, but similar. Jamal is good, right? Like, I'm not taking anything away from him. He led the league in touchdowns. we're certainly going to miss his ability to punch the ball in the end zone. But here's the thing. Jamal averaged 4.1 yards behind Detroit's offensive line, who's pretty good. Look, Montgomery averaged 4 yards a carry behind Chicago Bears offensive line, who aren't good. So if you take Montgomery and you put him behind Detroit's line, you're looking at a significant upgrade, and he's younger. I don't see this as a bad move getting rid of Jamal Williams. And if he felt disrespected, I mean, he got a chance to shop the market. I don't think he got as good of a deal down in New Orleans. But, when you don't feel loved by a team or you don't feel respected, or like he said in his press conference coming to Detroit, he got picked up on the rebound by Detroit when Green Bay dropped him. If you don't feel loved by that rebound pickup, you gotta move on, Jamal. And that's essentially what he did. But there was a bit of sounded a bit bitter in that interview, saying that he felt disrespected by the offer that the Lions came back at. But that's his opinion, and he's certainly entitled to it. And last but not least this week are the Minnesota Vikings. Boy, it's some tough times in Minnesota. Like Lil Yachty say, it's cold like Minnesota. Minnesota is in a weird spot because they have essentially done nothing in free agency. And by nothing, I mean not absolutely nothing. Like they went and signed Byron Murphy, who was the Arizona Cardinals' #1 cornerback. He's a younger kid. Signed him to a deal to try to backfill for some of the defensive backs and veteran guys that they lost on their defense. And that's quite a few people. They lost linebackers. They lost multiple defensive backs. They lost defensive linemen. Everyone's been exiting the Minnesota Vikings. They got linebackers who want to leave. So it's quite the show going on in Minnesota. But the reason Minnesota hasn't done so much in free agency is because they're kind of limited, right? The Chicago Bears have about $41 million in cap space to play around with, which is the most in the NFL. The Minnesota Vikings have like a negative $1 million to operate with. Like they are strapped for salary cap in Minnesota, which means people got to get cut so that they can try to get some of that money back to work out some deals, which is why Thielen caught the axe, but he's fine because he found himself down in Carolina where they're trying to build a championship organization, and he's being quoted as saying they could be going to the Super Bowl. And the way they've been stacking their team up, depending on who they take with this #1 pick, they actually could find themselves at least in the playoffs because that team's going to be much better than most of their division. But back to Minnesota, though. Minnesota has only one pick in the top 85 draft picks for this year. So if you're paying attention, Minnesota's got no cap space. Minnesota's only got one draft pick in the top 85. Minnesota's got players who want to leave. Here with a note, Minnesota was ranked like #1 amongst players for organizations, like how the organization treats you and how you care about the organization. They were ranked #1. But everybody wants to go. Could be because this year is going to be tough for them. Money's going to be tight. And without the ability to draft well to backfill many of the positions that they're losing, they're going to have to look for some golden nuggets in these late round drafts that they have and really hope that they can potentially restructure some deals to make some additional money available for folks to come in. So Minnesota's going to have a really difficult time luring folks into the team when they don't really have the kind of money to throw around like the Bears and the Lions have in this offseason. You know who they did give money to? They gave money to Alexander Mattison, which creates an interesting question. What about Dalvin Cook? Right? Because you just gave Mattison 2 years, something like $6 million. When Dalvin Cook is still owed $11 million in cash, and he's like a $10 or $12 or $14 million hit on Minnesota's salary cap. I believe they are going to shop Cook somewhere. and get someone to pay the rest of that money that they owe him. But it's quite the move to make when you haven't made a definitive decision on the person who was more productive, remained healthy, and was your star guy all of last year. It sounds like the Minnesota Vikings are trying to make some additional moves at the running back spot, but Mattison won't be one of those. And maybe he'll get more of a featured position in the offense, which could net, some positive things. When he got the touches, he can be an effective running back. But with him and Cook sharing time and Cook being the majority of that time, it just doesn't make any sense. But this most recent re-signing of Mattison seems to be pointing in the direction of Minnesota starting to cut ways with Cook. But all of that is TBD. What we know right now is they still got Kirk Cousins. They still got Justin Jefferson. That's who they're rolling with. So Minnesota's going to have a rough go next year, trying to pull off the same number of wins or more that they did last year and get themselves to that number 1 seed. When they are hemorrhaging folks on the defense, they don't have cash to replace people, and they are slim on the draft board. So I don't know what's happening in Minnesota, but you guys better brace for a cold winter because it's coming. So we're going to get to Around the League, but before we do that, this section of Around the League is sponsored by Off Rack Shop. Off Rack Shop is a premier secondhand retailer. They have clothes for men, women, they have accessories, and more. If you are looking at the show notes or on YouTube, check out our description. We'll have a link to Off Rack Shop and a special 15% off code if you want to use it. If you like resale and not paying retail, definitely head to offrackshop.com. All right, so now we're getting around the league, and we're going to talk about some of the best moves that have happened this week. So I mentioned this earlier, but Adam Thielen has gone to Carolina. He's talking about Super Bowl for Carolina, and he wants to be a part of that. Again, Minnesota cut him for cap reasons, and he has quickly found a new home and potentially a future for the next few years. Also, in the news right now is Austin Eckler. Austin Eckler wants cash. He feels like he is underpaid for what he does right now for the Chargers, and he's right. I mean, he is making $24.5 million on his 4-year deal, and he's technically not a free agent until next year. But the team has given him the ability to chat with other organizations about potentially paying him more. So it looks like there's some openness to both sides to being able to land him somewhere other than LA. But if he shops the market and can't find the value that he's looking for, maybe a long-term deal could still be available for him and the Chargers. Cam Newton's back. I mean, that's pretty much all I got to say about that. Cam's back. He threw at Auburn's Pro Day. He showed that he still has a cannon, and at 33, I think he's 33 years old, he probably is still better than some of the starting quarterbacks in the league, but I don't know how many. And I don't know if you're willing to take the risk on Cam. But I tell you, if you do, you could be surprised in the kind of weapon that you get at quarterback and how much you can get him for. I'm guessing Cam would be league minimum. If you can get Cam on a league minimum deal, you are winning. I don't care what you do with him. You line him up at tight end. But if you get him for the right amount of money, I think Cam could be a valuable asset to a lot of organizations, if for nothing else, as a backup quarterback. And offensive lineman is how we're going to end today's episode. There's been quite a bit of movement in the O-line, and I know they don't often get a lot of shine, so I want to make sure that we highlight some of these big dollar moves that have happened in the league this past week. So Orlando Brown got a ring last year with the Chiefs, and then this year he's going to get paid. He left the Chiefs and went to the Bengals on a 4-year, $64 million contract with 31 of that guaranteed. So boom, imagine you come off of getting a Super Bowl, you riding pretty high. Next thing you know, somebody comes and offers you $64 million and said, as a matter of fact, here's 31 that you don't have to worry about doing anything to get. That's a pretty good 2 years, right? That's a good year and a half. I wish somebody dropped $64 million at my feet and said, here you go, buddy, go block somebody. But he's not the only one getting big money on the offensive line. Mike McGlinchey I probably messed up your name, Mike. I'm sorry. Mike McGlinchey from the 49ers got 5 years, $87 million with $50 million guaranteed. Boy, that's getting into Lane Johnson territory. I can't say that I know much of McGlinchey's work. I can't believe that he's as good as Lane Johnson, though. And if he is, well, I guess he deserves that 50 mil guaranteed and 87 over 5 years. But boy, that's a lot of cash. And that was going to the Broncos. The Broncos out here trying to protect Russell Wilson. I get it. It's important. Got a new head coach. He wants to solidify things that are important, that offensive line. And he did it. They just spent a whole lot of money to do it. And lastly, Jawan Taylor went from the Jags to the Chiefs, sort of backfilling Orlando Brown, just the other side of the line. The Chiefs spent 80 mil with 60 of that guaranteed for Jawan Taylor. So there are some big contracts being handed out for some big men on the offensive line. And I'm sure that most of them deserve it. Here's the thing, guys. I really appreciate you guys coming along on this journey headed north. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or iHeartRadio, I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Definitely hit the 5-star or leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast listening device. And if you're watching us on YouTube, give me a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. Really do appreciate you guys viewing. My name is D-Tron. This is an NFC North podcast. And next week, if you come back, make sure you got your bags packed because we're headed north. Peace. You talking about football?
Yeah, but NFC North. Let's talk football.